It's the Dean Legge Show for the week of Georgia's game with Clemson. I'm sure everybody's excited for the season to get here. Georgia and a number 16 Clemson taking on one another. Big game for sure. Not as big as last year's game, but probably the second biggest game in the country this year, maybe the third biggest, whereas last year was clearly and obviously the biggest game in the year. A lot of changes for both teams. A lot more changes for Clemson on offense. They have lost quite a few guys, whether it's Taj Boyd, namely Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins, but not just those two. Rob McDowell, the running back, as well as Clemson's number 2 receiver last year. I think Clemson lost almost all of its offensive production with the exception of a couple of guys. We don't know right now who the running back is going to be, although it could be Adam Choice from Thomasville in Georgia. He could be the guy. Tyshawn Dye is hurt for them. They had a senior that was lost for the season in preseason. It's been not a lot of fun at Clemson as it relates to offensive turnovers coming into the season. Defensively, Clemson has a very good front seven, almost all seniors. Now, Corey Crawford will not play in this game. He went to school at Carver in Columbus, wanted to commit to Georgia at one time, but Georgia goofed that up pretty good. Which is another story for another day. But anyway, he won't play. Gary Peters, who's a reserve defensive back from Conyers, he won't play. And then they also have a suspended offensive lineman. Those 3 guys from Georgia suspended. So that'll hurt Clemson because that's 2 starters that are suspended. Georgia has missing 3 guys. Malcolm Mitchell due to injury, and then Davin Bellamy, a backup linebacker, is suspended for the game for a DUI in August, and Justin Scott Wesley is out this game for I was going to say minor possession, but misdemeanor possession of pot, which is the same thing that Nick Marshall has at Auburn. Nick Marshall's going to play this week, but not start for the Tigers. So, nonetheless, big game for Georgia and Clemson, both teams. I mean, it's impossible to know really what to expect from Clemson's offense. Cole Stout's never started. He's played a lot of games, but he's never started for the Tigers. They are also going to throw Deshaun Watson in there, which is going to be curious to see. I mean, I saw Deshaun play live twice. Once was against Tucker, where I went to high school, and he did not have a great 4 quarters. He had a pretty good first quarter, and then at some passing camps. So I don't know what to expect of Deshaun. I know that he can run. We all know that. And I think eventually he will fit in quite well in Clemson's system. But to come up the first week playing not even 40 minutes from home, that's going to be tough. A lot of expectations on Deshaun. I think people in Clemson are really building him up. And I think that's a dangerous thing to do. Of course, Georgia has 4 running backs coming into the season, if not 5. We'll be curious to see in the end what happens with Brendan Douglas. Georgia's going to be a little bit more, less reliant on the tight end, that's for sure, and much more reliant on the receivers and running back, namely Todd Gurley, but also Keith Marshall, Nick Chubb, and Sony Michel. There could be, and that might not be the order. I mean, it could be that they have a special package for Sony, which I anticipate that they will. I think Georgia also feels like they're going to be better on special teams this year, which would mean that they'd be better in the return games because their kicking has been very good over the last few years. With Marshall Morgan since about the midpoint of 2012. So people ask questions on Dog Post, and I answer them. If you're a subscriber, you get a chance to ask questions. Most of the stuff that we have on Dog Post is free and available to everyone, so you should come check it out. And anyway, we got some recruiting stuff online right now too. So we're just going to get straight into the questions, and we'll take it from there. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm already 4.5 minutes into this monologue. Payne Hall asks, who gets the most running back snaps after Todd Gurley by season's end? I think it might be Sony Michel. I mean, that's definitely possible. I don't think it's going to be Nick Chubb. But with Keith being back, but not being a full year back from an ACL injury, I think it could be Sony. But we'll see now. I expect both of those guys to have more than 500 yards rushing. Now that people will say, well, that doesn't sound like that much. It think about that now. I mean, Todd, if Todd's healthy, he should have 1,500 yards, and if both those guys have 500 each, and then Nick Chubb throws in maybe 300 yards, something like that, 200 yards. That's a pretty decent run game. I expect Georgia to have a very strong run game. I mean, obviously when they're playing Florida, perhaps when they're playing Clemson, these teams with experienced front sevens, they're going to have a harder time. But they've run on Florida. They ran on Clemson last year. And Todd Gurley is a difficult guy to bring down. And now there's the threat of him catching the ball out of the backfield. I mean, Georgia didn't have receivers at the end of last year. Not like they've got coming into this year. And they had to check down to Todd. Todd was pretty tough out of the backfield. He was almost as effective as a receiver out of the backfield as he was as a runner. Think about that. Tank Dog 5878 says, do you see a package where we could see Jordan Jenkins, Leonard Floyd, and Reggie Carter on the field on third down at the same time? Well, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be a package. It could just be those guys will be on the field. You know, I mean, Leonard and Jordan are going to be on the field on third down. We know that. Apparently, no middle linebacker is safe, so there's no telling who will be on the field at any time. I mean, Ramik Wilson, I believe he might not start. I mean, I don't know if they're lying about this depth chart thing. I think that it's very possible he might not start. So if he's not going to start, and there's no telling. Reggie Carter's a good linebacker. But Amarlo Herrera has been a dog. I mean, he has been after it all the time for these last couple of years. I mean, he played a lot as a true freshman in 2011. He started some in 2000. He started a lot in 2011. He started a fair amount in 2012. Last year, he started all the games. I mean, Amarlo is a lot better than people want to give him credit for. I mean, I think nationally, he's sort of the invisible linebacker at Georgia. Now, you're sitting there looking at Tim Kimbrough. Georgia's got linebackers and they got running backs. And they should have both, by the way. They should always have linebackers. State of Georgia produces linebackers. I mean, State produces a lot of linebackers because of the athleticism in the state and the fact that there's not a lot of spread offenses. So there's a lot of linebackers, and there should be at Georgia every year. The Boy Racer 45 says, do you think this year's offensive line might be the best that Georgia has had on the field in some time? It seems like we have the depth this year and we just haven't had in the past. Also, what have you heard about Keith Marshall this fall? He seems to have been quiet. Well, Keith Marshall's not coming up to interviews, so that's one reason he's quiet. And he's a quiet guy to some degree too. Is he being bothered by the injury, or they're just lightly working him to keep him ready for the season? I'll start with the Keith Marshall thing. Well, let's not ignore the fact that it's not even been a full year. I think it's been right at 10 months that Keith got hurt and had that surgery for the ACL. So you have to, I mean, now he's listed as the backup. But yeah, of course he should be given every consideration to try to get back healthy before there are expectations of what, to think from Keith. So I don't know. I think they are not going crazy on these running backs. I think that you could see that in scrimmage statistics. But I think that there should be some patience with Keith. I have said that there should be some patience with Todd, too, because he was a lot more banged up than people know last year at the end of the year. But it seems like he's made a full recovery. Now, he says he's 100%, Todd Gurley. I mean, I don't have any reason to doubt what he has to say. As it relates to the offensive line, do I think it's the best Georgia has had on the field in some time? Well, the sort of best group that Mark has had in his 14 years at Georgia was that 2002 offensive line, which was pretty good. This one's probably not like that because it doesn't have the tackles, but it has everything else. Greg Pike might be the best offensive lineman at his position on this line. John Theus is playing left guard. David Andrews is playing center. Those three guys form a very good nucleus to a experienced and big offensive line that ran against everybody last year. I can't recall a game where they struggled to run except Vanderbilt, and J.J. Green was the running back that day. So They ran against Tennessee. They ran against Florida. They ran against Auburn. Obviously, they ran against Georgia Tech. They ran against South Carolina. They ran against Clemson. I mean, Chris Burnett and Dallas Lee, they were not. They were not. I mean, Greg Pike's better than those guys. So we'll see what happens with Georgia. They are deep. They are definitely deep. Isaiah Wynn is going to be a multiple-year starter, probably a 2 or 3 year starter at Georgia. He's a good player. He may be the starting center next year, but he's definitely going to start at guard. So they have done. I mean, Will Friend needs to be given some credit. He's done a really good job of getting this offensive line into the 20th century, 21st century. That was long overdue. And, you know, some of it was that guys got hurt. Trenton Sturdivant, you had a left tackle in Trenton Sturdivant that would have been a multi-year starter, and he got banged up after his freshman year. Clint Bowling was very good. But sometimes I feel like the default is that Georgia doesn't have a good offensive line, and I think that's overdone. You can't just score points with your skill position players. And I think we saw that last year. When those skill position players weren't in there, woo, it was thin. But, yeah, I think it's a good offensive. I think it's a good offensive line. I don't think it's great. I think, you know, again, if they had Larry Tunsil, if he hadn't gotten yanked out from underneath him, you know, you'd have your left tackle for 3 years. And then John would be playing on the right, and Colton would probably be playing left guard. But Cablano, Greg Pike, David Andrews, boy, watch out for the sweep. Greg Pike's athletic; he'll get out there and knock your ass out. You better watch it if if he's coming around on a sweep. Yeah, kick and move. BJ Dog, 2Gs, says, should we be concerned about the wide receiver situation going to Clemson, South Carolina? With Mitchell and Justin Scott Wesley injuries will Malcolm Mitchell and Justin Scott injuries make us 2-1 to Mitchell to start the season and lead to early losses? Well, first of all, I think Justin will play against South Carolina. I think it's very possible Malcolm could play against South Carolina, but we'll see. There was pretty much no chance of Malcolm playing against Clemson, but we're still 17 days away from when Georgia plays South Carolina and Columbia. So that's a fair amount of time to continue getting healthy. I expect Justin seems fine, but he wasn't going to play against Clemson no matter what anyway because of either the injury or the suspension. Take your pick. So I think he's suspended for this game, although no one said that I'm aware of. I don't think if they lose, it's going to be because Justin or Malcolm are not playing. You still got Chris Conley, who's just, steady, if not spectacular. Michael Bennett, who is very steady. Does Jonathan Rump show up this year? Reggie Davis is a speed guy. Georgia doesn't have a killer wide receiver. Sammy Watkins doesn't play for Georgia. A.J. Green doesn't play for Georgia and hasn't for some time. This has been the receiver group, and Malcolm was the one. But Malcolm's never played a full season at Georgia, and this year's going to be no different. So I think that we'll see what the future holds pretty quick. But yeah, they're without 2 of their best 3 receivers coming into this first game. I mean, I'm trying to think of other guys that play. I mean, we'll have to see how Isaiah McKenzie plays. I think Sony Michel will be split out wide some. Mike Bogo, I mean, Mike can, those guys being out just hurts. It doesn't preclude them from winning. If they lose to South Carolina, it will be because South Carolina's a better team. If they lose to Clemson, it will be because Clemson did something right, and Georgia couldn't answer that. So that's what I think. Some recruiting questions here. Rick Tite asks, Thompson and Ledbetter are both defensive tackles, roughly the same size, and both are highly rated recruit. What gives Thompson the edge over Ledbetter as far as being the more elite player at this point? Are they very similar, or do they bring different assets to the table? Having been around them both lately, in my opinion, Trenton is a little bit bigger. Trenton is a nose guard who is very, defensive tackle, whatever, that is very disruptive. neither of those guys is bad. Ledbetter played pretty well for Tucker the other night. Um, but Westover wouldn't. I mean, Westover would probably allow a lot more points if Trenton didn't play for them, whereas Tucker is going to stop people anyway. I think when you look at those two guys, Ledbetter's a little smaller, and Trenton is a little more raw, and that trajectory is what people look at sometimes. I mean, Ledbetter certainly looks the part of what could be an NFL player. Trenton definitely does, and so that's those two guys. My guess is maybe Trenton can throw his hands better. I don't think that's true. I think it's probably Ledbetter on that front. But Trenton makes a lot of plays and makes a lot of plays from defensive tackle, deep, nose guard. That's not common. I mean, the job of that position is to redirect. I mean, is to make linebackers make tackles or allow linebackers to make tackles. The point of that position is not to make sacks or tackles. But when I was in Albany or Leesburg actually the other day, Trenton made a lot of tackles for that position. That just shouldn't happen. And he had no less than 2 quarterback pressures. That's a good day for a college defensive lineman, particularly an interior one. Defensive ends, yeah, they should rush the passer a little bit more. And I think that's what we're going to see with Ledbetter. With Ledbetter, he's got more as it relates to versus Trenton. Jonathan's more polished. You go to Tucker High School. Now, some guys at Tucker are raw, yes. There's not tons raw about, Ledbetter. He can still grow, but I mean, as a human being and as a person, he's got a good foundation. There's not much that he's going to have to learn about, stuff. Brian Lamar and Tucker have lost 2 football games in the last 2 years. They're good. So Ledbetter's going through that Tucker Football League, the Lions. There's plenty of good that Jonathan has already had. But we'll see. I think they both have high ceilings for sure. Maybe Trenton's better. I would say Trenton is better. But they're also different in a couple of ways. It's hard for me to compare them because to some degree they play different positions. Ledbetter is not going to be a nose, whereas Trenton definitely could be a nose, and those are tougher to sort of judge. Hogwallop asks how does Tom Luganbill have a job? That's just the power of ESPN. I mean, you don't have to know what you're doing to be employed by them. I think they have a lot of good people. I have friends that work for ESPN, but there are some things he says sometimes. I don't know what he's talking about. But the other thing too about his situation is he has to cover the entire country, and that probably is not very easy. But when he said that Aaron Murray had a stronger arm than Bryce Ramsey, I just, what are you talking about? That by the way, Aaron has a very good arm. It ain't that. It's not Zach Mettenberger, Matthew Stafford, Bryce Ramsey kind of arm. That doesn't mean you're a better quarterback. Just if you can't see that, someone who played sports in college at a high level should be able to tell that. I don't care. I mean, I don't know Tom Luganbill. UGA Dog Forever 08 says, "What's your biggest concern? What's your biggest concern going into the Clemson game?" Well, I think what your biggest concern is what you think reality, because you don't know. I mean, last year Todd was hurt at the end of the year. Hudson Mason didn't end the year the greatest, throwing quarterback on earth. Is Jeremy Pruitt that good? Stuff like that. I mean, I don't think it's anything that. I think it is probably what you think for the most part. But the problem is you're playing somebody else, and somebody else can beat you. And I think with a lot of people that brings fear. But I don't think you should approach it that way. I think the big thing is I'm going to see where I'm at today. And I'm going to see, is Chris Conley going to catch every ball in the end zone? Is David Andrews going to get his ass whipped by Grady Jarrett again? Is Rameek Wilson going to yank Tim Kimbrough out of the way and go onto the field as a starter? Is Dominique Sanders going to play passionately but not out of control? Is John Theus going to be able to hold his own against Vic Bailey? Beasley, excuse me. Vic Bailey's a car dealership. The money's on the table for John. This is one of those games where if he plays well, people will start taking him seriously as an NFL left tackle. It's stuff like that. I mean, it's real deal stuff. I mean, people can sugarcoat it if they want to. I want to know who's going to be. I mean, is Dietrich Dukes your guy that's going to be your wham blocker? Is Hudson going to be the Hudson that has prepared all summer, or is he going to be a guy that kind of didn't play well against Tech at the beginning of the season? But that's the question. And Clemson has questions too. But you play Clemson once and then you move on. So the questions really are about the program at Georgia, not about matching up with Clemson specifically, because the reality is the winner of this game hasn't won the national championship, their division, or their conference. Either team can lose this game and still go on. Certainly Clemson can lose this game and go on because they're playing on the road, can go on to the playoffs. So I think the biggest concern, just looking at it, is can Georgia's secondary be average in this game? If they can be average, I think it's going to be tough for Georgia to lose, just because Georgia matches up strength to strength with Clemson. I think Georgia's strength is better than Clemson's strength, which is the offense against Clemson's front seven. I think I'd take Todd Gurley against anybody. I saw him play against a very good Alabama defense. He's not scared of anybody. He's going to run down anybody. If you're Clemson, I think the question is quarterback and offense in general. I mean, what happens if any of those linemen at Clemson gets hurt? Who is the running back? Who is the primary receiver? And how will Colt Stout react with? I mean, this is the largest place Clemson's ever played. 93,000 people is a lot. Now, it's not a lot more than – it's only about 10,000 to 11,000 more than the other big places they play, but it's big. And it's the first game of this season. So everybody has concerns, but I want to see these couple things. If these things happen, Georgia will be okay. Secondary plays with passion, but plays within themselves, not going crazy. David Andrews doesn't get his ass whipped and whips Grady Jarrett's ass. If that happens, Georgia wins by 2 touchdowns. John Theus against Beasley. If John can hold his own, Georgia will be fine. And then, what's Georgia's pass rush going to do to Colt Stout? Because their run game is in limbo, Clemson, right now. And so I think that's what you watch. Those things, I think David Andrews is probably going to be pretty motivated coming into this game. Grady Jarrett's a buddy of his, and Grady got the better of him last year, no question. Grady's a good player. Dean, 1 week before quick kickoff, how do you feel about the 2014 Dogs versus how you felt about the 2013 Dogs at this point last season? I mean, I feel very similar. I just don't think they're going to have catastrophic injuries the way they did last year. That team should have won the East last year, and they were on the way to doing that. But and I think they probably would have. But I think this team should win the East. At a minimum, that they should, be no worse than second. I think playing at South Carolina is tough. I'm curious to see really what South Carolina. I mean, I'll be watching that game closely that they've got with A&M, and I think the expectation should be at a minimum to win the East. And there's nobody in the SEC that's that great this year. I mean, Alabama's good, but they're not as good as they were 2 years ago. Auburn. I don't think Georgia's scared of Auburn. So, and it could be LSU that winds up there. I can't, for me, I can't see anybody other than South Carolina and Georgia getting to the dome from the East. But the conference has a way of being funny sometimes. I mean, Florida hasn't been in the SEC championship game in 5 years. That's a long time for them. And, South Carolina hasn't been in 4 years. So, It's been a while for a couple of teams. Georgia's done pretty well here lately, but it's time to get back to Atlanta. Again, from Rig Tight, what, Dean, are you wearing the purple shirt Saturday night? Well, one of Clemson's colors is purple, and at Georgia, the stands are far enough away from you to where you don't get things thrown or poured on you, thankfully. But no, I don't know what I'm going to wear. I will adjust my wardrobe accordingly, depending on heat. I'll probably bring multiple shirts to the game because it's going to be pretty hot out there. What do you think? Me too. Tennessee Log Dog says, name one standout freshman for offense, defense, and special teams. Special teams should be Isaiah McKenzie. I would say probably Dominique Sanders is a heck of a player on defense, but Malcolm Parrish could be too. I mean, on offense, it's going to be hard to argue against Sony and Michelle, but Isaiah Wynn is a good player too now. Which home and away game will be the most difficult matchup this year? Well, home, probably Auburn. Away, probably South Carolina. That's about right. And, of course, Gators are always tough. What will surprise the fan base, is good or bad, about this year's team that you've seen out of August practice? I think they're going to be better on special teams. I think they're going to be better. I don't think they're going to be world-beating. I think they're going to be better. I don't know if that's going to be surprising. Bad. I'm trying to think of the bad. They could, and I think they're going to be better conditioned in general. I think so. Now we'll see. As far as bad is concerned, I think it's the stuff I mentioned earlier. Individual matchups and playing with passion, but without reckless abandon. Being smart, being passionately smart. I think that there's a possibility with a couple of guys that not be the case. I mean, even Todd gets into it, man, and sometimes that's not the smartest thing to do, but that's Todd. So you got to be yourself. I think that's the big thing. You got to be whatever you are. You got to be that. And for Todd, he likes to be in people's faces. Who has been your favorite, most talented redheaded employee over the last 12 years? I can't remember any. H.M. Wood, how do you think Pruitt and Grantham differ schematically? Which of the two are more aggressive? Well, I think that Pruitt's going to mix it up more as far as this scheme is concerned. They will not necessarily be 3-4 the entire time. As far as aggression, they both get after it with the blitz pretty good. I think Georgia's defense is going to be better for a lot of different reasons. And I think that you can't ignore a couple of things. Number one, they're older. This group's older everywhere. Number two, there's a coaching change, and that matters. Number three, they're not playing the same sort of firepower offense as they did last year. I mean, that was a record season for Clemson last year. That was a record season for Auburn. That was a record season for Missouri. That was a record season for LSU in terms of production. At least three of those teams are not going to have seasons like they did last year. I mean, I don't think Clemson is. I don't think Missouri is. And I don't think Auburn is. That matters. And so what we're seeing here now is that to some degree, Georgia's not playing the 1 seed every time. They're playing like the 4. And I just think it'll all add up to a more successful season. But Georgia's at the level now where I think a lot of people understand that 8-5 last year had almost everything to do with injuries. People would say, well, it was bad coaching. Okay, if you want to say that about the defense, that's fine. Whatever. But you could see 2 games in there where they could have won if they had played better just as a team, whether it's special teams or even on offense, not getting touchdowns when they got some field goals. So I think the big thing is they have established basically that they are a 10 or 11 win program. In the last 3 years, they've averaged 10 wins, if my math's correct. 10, 12, 8, that's 10 wins. So, are they going to make the jump? I think they regressed a little bit at quarterback. and tight end. Everywhere else, I'm not sure they regressed. Now, next year they will regress at running back. They may improve at quarterback, but they'll regress at running back. They may slightly regress at offensive line. But they're no longer, I mean, Georgia's no longer in the situation where they're desperate in the way that they were. And there was a time when that was the case. I mean, it gotten bad half a decade ago. But that's not where they're at anymore. And I think that that's the big thing where Pruitt is coming in off one of the worst, talk about the other teams having record seasons. Georgia had a record season too on defense, one of the worst ever. So in school history. So he's going to get a lot of benefit from just being the next guy. That's not the way people should look at it. They should look at Todd Grantham. If you want to compare those two, Todd Grantham got Georgia, at a minimum, got them to Atlanta twice. Both of those games, the other team scored more than 30 points. If Jeremy Pruitt wants to be better, this shouldn't be his bar, but if people want to make this argument, Georgia needs to get back at least to Atlanta, and the goal is to allow 24 points or less, because Georgia can probably win a game like that. 30 points in a championship game against a team that's either ranked number 1 or number 2 in the country, which is what Georgia's faced last year. They've been in Atlanta. That's not good enough. That's not going to be good enough to win. And so that's the key. Get to Atlanta, hold them to mid-20s, and win. So that's the formula. Now, will it happen? I don't know. I think Georgia takes care of Clemson this weekend. I wouldn't be stunned with a Clemson upset, but it'd be a little bit surprising. And then Georgia's got to get ready for South Carolina. I mean, no matter what happens in the Clemson game, a win over South Carolina would certainly cure any loss to Clemson, just because of the division, etc. But I think that this is a game Georgia should win, and I expect them to. And I don't think people should get too fired up one way or the other about the outcome of this game. I mean, obviously, I think they'd rather win than lose, obviously. But the dynamic in college football has changed with this playoff. And I think that we're going to see over the season that that you can't get too burnt up about one loss or two losses. And that's just the new reality of college football. It doesn't take away from the regular season, but anymore in the SEC, you got to be able to learn how to live with one loss, because it happens. I mean, it literally happens to everybody. A lot of times teams lose by 2 touchdowns and go on and represent their division. So it happens. All right, Dean Legge Show for the week of Georgia's game with Clemson.